Hi, everyone. That was possibly the best introduction I've ever had at an event, online or in real life. I've never been called the real MVP before. Um, thank you very much, Max. It's really lovely to be in virtual Vienna on this balmy summer evening. It's nice to get a little bit of a holiday, even if it's an imaginary one. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about making the web more whimsical with SVG. So before we get started, I'd just like to ask, I can't hear you, but I'd just like to ask, which one of these two possible websites are you currently designing? Is it this centrally aligned bad boy with the big header image? Or is it this quirky left-aligned variant? So John wrote this frankly glorious tweet back in 2016. 2016, that's ages ago. Like 2020 has lasted at least 5 years by itself. So that's a long time. Why are we still building these websites? So hi, introduction again, double introduction. I'm Cassie. I'm a front-end developer, and I think that we can do better than that. The web was 30 years old in March last year. 30. It's not that old, really. It's my age. And I think that the web is having an early midlife crisis. If the web was a person, I think it would look a bit like this at the moment. He's just trying to do his job. Bless him. He's tired. All anyone wants to talk about is metrics and how many sprints it'll take to ship the next feature. And all the stakeholders just keep getting him in endless meetings. Wait, this is 2020, isn't it? All the stakeholders keep getting him in endless Zoom calls. So he's grown up and he's put on a suit, well, like half a suit and some pajama bottoms. And he's forgotten how cool and how spontaneous and how full of creativity he used to be. Thanks for the quote, Max, by the way. So I started making fun stuff on the web back in the halcyon days of dial-up and GeoCities. I was around 11 at the time. We had one computer and it was the household computer, and I was allowed to use it for educational purposes. So obviously I would wait until my parents were asleep, and then I'd quietly sneak downstairs to try to use the family computer. It was harder back then to quietly connect to the internet because we had dial-up. So I'd usually have to wrap loads of towels and blankets around the computer so that my parents didn't wake up when they heard the noise. And my early days on the web were mostly spent on Neopets. So this is my Shoiru, who incidentally is 32. And he hasn't lost his sense of childlike wonder. He's still going on adventures and looking for rainbows. So Neopets was great. It was a ton of fun, but it was also accidentally educational. It was like MySpace and GeoCities. It encouraged customization. So you could get stuck in with like HTML and CSS and marquee tags and blink tags and put GIFs everywhere. It was wonderful. So it had this super accessible, friendly HTML guide on the website, and that talked through everything that you needed to know. So this was my guide. It was my entry point to making stuff on the internet. And I took the knowledge that I learnt on Neopets and I set up a little business at my school. So my business, I used to do custom MySpace pages for people, and I would swap sparkly cursors for donuts from the tuck shop because my parents didn't give me tuck shop money. So yeah, big dreams, sparkly cursors for everyone, tons of donuts for little tiny podgy Cassie. So in honor of this, I actually got a Chrome extension for this talk. Let's see if it works. Way, awesome, nice and sparkly. We can continue. Also, I just want to point out that the animations might be a bit jerky via Zoom or Twitch. So if things are a little bit stilted, I'm going to share my slide deck afterwards, and then you can look at all of the animations in their 60 FPS glory. So don't worry about that. So I'm not going to sit here and demand that we all throw sparkly cursors onto client sites. As much as I would love that, I'd be all over that. Sparkly cursors have definitely had their day. GeoCities and MySpace were glorious, but they were also gloriously shit too. A lot of these sites were the owner's first web pages, and they were great places to like learn and explore, but they were filled with auto playing music. They had tiny text over patterned backgrounds. A lot of them had links that didn't work, huge GIFs bloating the pages. And we've learned a lot about accessibility and performance since the early days of the web. And we know now that the most important part of a website is getting content to the user. But it doesn't have to be whimsy or accessibility, playful touches or performance. Why not both? So this is my website. It's full of SVG animations everywhere, but it's got the perfect lighthouse metrics. Also, shout out to Andy for his amazing 11T course, which definitely played a huge part in those lighthouse scores. Sarah Drasner wrote a really great article recently called In Defense of a Fussy Website. And in it, she says, when a site is done with care and excitement, you can tell. You feel it as you visit, the hum of intention, the craft, the cohesiveness, the attention to detail is obvious, and in turn, you meet them halfway. These are the sites with the low bounce rates and the best engagement metrics. And engagement metrics, whether people enjoy your site, whether they want to click around, whether they want to stay there, they're just as important as lighthouse metrics, arguably more so. The things that encourage people to engage with a site, the things that make your site memorable are the little details. These things stand out in an otherwise flat digital landscape. They say a human made this. So how can we create websites that are delightful and memorable and feel like a human crafted them? First things first, lean into what you enjoy, whatever that is. So if you're into writing, write some heartfelt copy, maybe play around with color or layout or add some sound or some animation. You know, it's your piece of work, make it your own. I personally love animation, and I feel that adding movement can bring so much personality to a website. And animation on the web kind of has a bad rap. So contrary to popular opinion, It's not all or nothing with web animation. You don't have to go all in on some WebGL scroll jacking, swipey, skinny serif fonts to build a memorable website. Some of my favorite sites are websites that are mostly static and sensible and user-focused, but with fun touches. They've got bits that surprise you and encourage the user to explore and look around. And the great thing about interactions like this is that they're enhancements. So the site doesn't actually need them. They add joy, but not at the expense of delivering the content. And progressive enhancement is one of the main reasons that I love animating with SVG. So if you build an animated element on your site with, say, WebGL or with Canvas, it's very reliant on JavaScript. If the JavaScript fails for some reason, you're going to get a whole lot of nothing. If you use SVG and, say, a JavaScript animation library, and the JavaScript fails, the SVG illustration will still be there. It just won't animate. So the illustration is like the baseline, and then the animation is an enhancement on that. So additionally, some people have vestibular disorders, and animation can make them feel really queasy, like things moving around, especially parallax movements. And we can use the prefers reduced motion media query to kind of check to see if a user has a preference set for reduced motion, and then we can adjust our animations accordingly. So if you're doing an animation with SVG, it's really simple to just remove the animation and then it falls back nicely to the illustration itself. So let's back up a little bit. What is SVG? So a lot of the clue is in the name. So SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. You can create SVGs in vector graphics programs like Illustrator or Affinity Designer, and you get out an image. But it's an image format that's scalable because it uses maths to plot and connect points rather than being made up out of pixels. So you can make SVGs really, really tiny or really, really massive without affecting the resolution or file size. And the file size is also very small. So you could have a huge PNG on your website that takes up loads and loads of space, but if you had an SVG, it's much, much smaller. But SVG is great because it isn't just an image format. So under the hood, it's also a markup language. So after you get past the initial confusion of all of the ones and zeros, SVG is quite verbose. So if you look at some SVG markup, you'll see lots and lots of numbers, and it can look really confusing. But if you kind of look past the numbers, you can see that it starts looking quite familiar. You've got angled brackets, and you've got nested tags, just like HTML, and attributes. So in fact, it's quite a lot like HTML. My friend Richard explained it as SVG is an alternate universe version of HTML focused on graphics instead of documents. And I like that, so I stole it. And just like HTML, SVG has a DOM. So unlike other image formats like JPEGs, where you've just got one image, with an SVG, you can interact with elements inside the image. And you can style them and move them around to make animations. SVG graphics are basically illustrations that you can manipulate with code, which I think is just magical. So we can create animated illustrations that respond to user inputs, like scrolling or mouse interactions, or even the webcam. So in this pen, I'm getting the colors from a webcam feed, and then I'm updating some CSS variables to change the chameleon's color. Really fun to play around with. So in order to be able to animate SVG and kind of play around with it, you need access to its DOM. And you might have heard the term inline SVG before. So SVG and HTML are both XML-based markup languages. So they're best buddies. They get along really well. You can put SVG code right into your HTML. And because of this, you can mix up SVG elements with semantic DOM elements like buttons and forms to create some whimsy and add some fun to otherwise slightly mundane interactions. This was actually made by Adam Kuhn. I haven't credited him here. And it is actually on the CSS Tricks website. When I saw this, I was so happy. It made my day. Yeah, this is another one. This is a classic from Darren Seneff, making forms fun. Forms are never fun. Forms are super boring. But I would fill this in repeatedly. So yeah, SVG exists in this wonderful middle ground between design and dev and graphics and code and like UI animation and illustrative animation. And again, because SVG has a DOM, you can make it nice and accessible. So this text here isn't really text, it's just paths. But it has a title element here. And because of that, screen readers will read it out like normal text. So this makes SVG really great for like logos and text animation. This is also an SVG. This has text inside. Yeah, this has actual text inside. Let me have a look at it here. Here it is. So screen readers can also access this, unlike text inside a canvas element, which again is just a black box. Yeah, and you can also use SVG for data viz. And I'm going to sound like a stuck record here, but you can easily make this accessible to screen readers because it has real text inside. And again, progressive enhancement, so it will fall back to a static image without JavaScript. Plus, it's super fun making illustrative data viz. I hooked into the solar panels at work for this, and we've got some like some solar panels and an API, and we're growing a little virtual garden based on our CO2 savings, which is super fun. But also, I'm aware that you can't always go big on client sites. Like you can't put submarines and virtual gardens in everything. And that's understandable. But SVG is great at being small too, like scalable vector graphics. So you can use SVG to create these delightful little micro interactions. And icons are really great candidates for a bit of animation. You can convince clients on them really easily. They don't take a huge amount of time, and it's a really great challenge to work out how to use a really small space to convey an action or add a little bit of whimsy. And when you get it right, it's great. It's such a good feeling. You can pack quite a lot of fun into a small area. And again, because you can mix SVG with the DOM, you can use semantic elements. So this little fingerprint scanner is just a bit of fun that I made, but it's an actual button. So you can tab to it and screen readers can see it and all of that good stuff. This little complete order button is great as well. So yeah, another great thing about SVG is that the barrier to entry is lower than Canvas or WebGL. It reminds me of those early like Neopets days and MySpace and stuff. SVG markup is similar to HTML, so that's pretty comfortable to get your head around. And if you know CSS, you can do SVG animation. So CSS animation is a really great place to start experimenting. It's what I did when I was getting to know SVG. So you don't need to add any libraries, so the syntax is nice and declarative, and you can reuse keyframes on multiple elements. For production though, CSS animation can be a bit of a nightmare, especially when it comes to transforms. So your animations can end up looking different depending on the browser. And this is because transforms, the issue with transforms in SVG is down to how transform origin is implemented. So DOM elements measure transform origin from their own top left corner. But with SVG in some browsers, transforms are measured from the SVG canvas itself, not the element. So you can see a little demonstration of it here. So there's a relatively new CSS property called transform box, and this looks really promising to fix the main issues, but the browser compatibility isn't 100% yet. We still don't have Edge or Internet Explorer, which is standard. So transform box defines the layout box that the transform and transform origin properties relate to. So if the transform box property is specified as fill box, that element's bounding box is used as the reference box, so the element itself. And if it's specified as view box, then the SVG viewport is used as the reference box. So if you want to use CSS for animation, you can use feature queries to check if the browser supports transform box, and then you pop your animation code in there. And then that will mean that your animations will be consistent cross-browser. You just won't get any animation in Internet Explorer or Edge, which again, progressive enhancement. So CSS can also be a bit unwieldy for more complex animations because you don't have the ability to create timelines and chain animations together. So if your animation's a bit more complicated and CSS is giving you a bit of a headache, or you need to support Internet Explorer, then it's probably time to reach for a JavaScript animation library. And when I got started doing SVG animation, this was the overwhelming thing. I just didn't know what JavaScript animation library to reach for because there's so many of them. So I'm here to make your life easier. There's a lot of libraries out there, but GreenSock is the only one that handles SVG transforms cross-browser. So they put a lot of extra effort into making the SVG side of things work. GreenSock's been around since the early Flash days, and their forums and the community around them and their docs are all absolutely amazing. So they're very supportive. Especially their forums, it's like Stack Overflow, but with nice people. And they've got loads and loads of starter pens on CodePen if you want to have an explore. And in my opinion, the best way to learn SVG animation or GreenSock is just by experimenting. Just get on CodePen and fork some things and get stuck in. And GreenSock as well, they've got a bunch of plugins that are specifically for SVG. So like Draw SVG, and Draw SVG allows you to show and hide SVG paths, which you can do with CSS. but this just gives you a lot more options, so you can be quite precise about how you want the path to draw in and which direction and how much. This is the kind of thing that you can achieve with Draw SVG. I'm going to play that again because it's so beautiful. Yeah, it wouldn't be an SVG animation talk without an example from Chris Gannon. He's amazing. And there's also Morph Svg, and Morph Svg makes morphing between different SVG paths a lot easier. If you've ever tried to morph between some SVG paths without using Morph Svg, you'll appreciate this, because you usually have to make sure that the path has exactly the same number of points. And if it doesn't, it either all goes wrong or you have to do a lot of maths. So they make it so that you don't have to do all the maths. It's great. And you can just play around with the fun stuff. So yeah, although I really love SVG, it's kind of up to you to find your own whimsy. Like, it doesn't matter what tools or libraries or languages you use to achieve it. It doesn't matter whether it's code or copy or concept. All that really matters is that the web needs a little more weird. It needs a bit more whimsy. I really love this quote by Miriam. She calls the web a fundamentally anti-capitalist mash-up art experiment. And that really speaks to me. Yeah, so let's use our powers to spark joy and make the web more whimsical again. Shout out to Max's website. Thanks for listening.